Amida Butts. Namo Amida Butts. Namo Amida Butts. Good morning. Since this is the first Sunday of the month, we will read the names, our Shotsuki list, which are the names of those who have passed away in the month of April. We will start with the most current. Mildred Pocock, Hiro Tsurudome, George Tachiki, James Noburo Nakashima, Kazuo Kiyono, Robert McDonald, Earl Osaki, Setsuko Himaka, Shimako Uda, Judy Shinohara, Masao Santo Higashi, Hidetoshi Akiyama, Kiri Magotsugu Ueji, Kiko Ueji, Kaneko Haude, Armando Leo, Yoshiko Miyazaki, Toshio Hayakawa, Kasuburo Ochi, Shinichi Okuyama, Yoshiko Takashima, Haruko Muraoka, Kenshi Tachiki, Taro Matsui, Shigenori Tsudome, Heizo Ito, Muneo Torimaru, James Kasubuchi, Ai Yamada, Shizuko Yanagihara, Yoshiko Tsuyoshi, Setsugo Taniguchi, Bensho Tsuji, Zenbei Iwashita, Mine Takeshita, Terry Doi, Frank Tachiki, Mike Hagio, Chio Yamagata, George Yukio Kodama, Kazumi Sugioka, Isao Imaizumi, Maguichi Hamano, Kuzo Sugiyama, Ryohei Tsujimura, Hajime Kyotoku, Uheiji Tanaka, Iwaguma Tsuneyoshi, Ume Inoue, Shizuo Izumo, Shinzaemon Fuji, George Kozuma, Saburo Oyama, Yoshiko Haseyama, Mansaku Shinohara, Hiromi Moribe, Yoichiro Torio, Yukichi Okuma, Yoshitaru Matsumoto, Masaichi Kuroda, Shizuko Kasubuchi, Seihachi Tsurudomoe, Saburo Sugiyama, Toyo Saburo Yanagihara. Now you may burn incense in their memory, and if there was anyone else of your loved ones who passed away in the month of April, please burn incense in honor of their memory. And with that, let's close with the Nembutsu. Namo Amida Butts, Namo Amida Butts, Namo Amida Butts, Namandas, Namanda. Good morning. Here it is April, and spring is here. Things are lightening up. I think we're anxious to have the warmer weather. April is also the month where we celebrate the birth of the Buddha. And what I wanted to talk about today was the significance before his birth and after his birth. He was born about 2,600 years ago. And he was born not a Buddha, but a prince. And we know that after his enlightenment, people really honored his life. As a prince, he was supposed to become a king. But fortunately, he decided to seek out the truth of life. And so after he was enlightened, his followers really wanted to honor his birth. And so, of course, stories were made. And we hear the story of his birth, and we celebrate it with the hanamido, the pouring of sweet tea, as it signified the raining of sweet rain. But also we hear the legend that at his birth, the Buddha took 7 steps and pointed to the heaven and the earth and said, "Below heaven and above heaven, I alone in the world honored one." Now, this seems unusual, taking 7 steps as an infant. But then this declaration, he was not really declaring that he was above other individuals as being the only world honored one. What he was signifying, and especially with the symbolism of the 7 steps, was that as a human, we were reaching an area beyond the 6 realms of human existence. And so let me go over these 6 realms. So again, the followers have the story of the birth of the Buddha to tell us something. Because in Buddhism, we don't take things literally, but we have something called upaya, called skillful means of teaching. And it's mythologic, it's symbolic. It tells us in story form, what the Buddha, the deeper truth might be. So what does these 7 steps indicate? First of all, we have what we call the 6 realms of human existence. And I think we've all experienced that. And the lowest is the hell realm. When things are terribly, going wrong, nothing's right, things look hopeless, we suffer. There are things that we just don't think we can get out of. And we've been in that realm. And then there's this realm of the hungry ghosts. And we're told that there's this insatiable greed, this desire to have more. And I think we've experienced that living in this capitalist society. The hungry ghosts have tiny throats where they can't get enough food. And we have this insatiable desire to have more. What's interesting is I see that even the rich want to get richer. Just this last week, this woman, Gina Champion Kane, who defrauded $400 million from actually some of her friends in a Ponzi scheme. Now, I always wonder why the rich want to get richer. What would you do with more millions than, more than 1 or 2 million? But this, again, shows us this attitude of the hungry ghosts. And then there's this realm of beasts, and this is animals. And we all have animal instincts. And I like to watch wildlife, videos and such. And especially when you see animals in the wild, like in Africa, it's always eat or be eaten. And there's this thought of, always being in danger without thinking of the others, but always just trying to survive. And we also have that attitude in life. And this attitude of just animal-like thinking without a sense of empathy, we experience as humans just recently, all of this anti-Asian sentiment, and we see that in the violence in this past year. And we see it, in the other areas where people have attacked our capital and there are mass shootings. And we wonder, where's the humanity? But this is the animal part of us that comes out in these events. Now, we're right here in the realm of the humans, and I'll get back to that shortly. But above us, we have the realm of the demigods. And I'm not sure really what that means, but to me, I get a sense that that might mean for our time, those people in the top 10% of our socioeconomic group, they've got a lot of money. And yet, as I said earlier, there's this desire for more. Even if we're really well off and comfortable, there's this thought of losing it or in competition with others. And so that, I think, is this area of the demigods. And then at the top level, we have the gods who are just comfortable. And again, we can think of this as perhaps being the top 1%, where we have billions of dollars and we can have anything we want. But what the Buddha tells us is that all things are impermanent. So we wonder, how long would this last? So let's get back to the human realm and these 7 steps. What this symbolizes is that even with all these 6 realms, from hell to beasts to the gods, only the human realm is able to wake up, to transcend beyond all these realms. And so it is so important to realize that we humans are at a very special place. And this is what the Buddha is telling us. He told us that he was not a god, he was a human who woke up. And so we can follow that path of waking up to resolve all these issues. Now, what the Buddha talked about was not changing the outside world to have the world suddenly kind of work to our favor. But he said our resolution could be in changing our minds, aligning our minds with truth, with how the world works. And that really determines our happiness or our suffering. And so we have the power just within our hearts and minds to determine whether we're happy or that we suffer. And so this is life before and after the birth of the Buddha, which we celebrate. Before we had all these 6 realms that we were trapped in that we really couldn't get out of. And yet he showed us that we can go beyond that. And this is the significance of his 7 steps. Now, let me explain it in this other way. There are germs, and we've always had germs. We know they're bacteria and now viruses, and they've always existed. And that's caused a lot of suffering. Now, we know that during the Civil War, so many people were killed, and yet we hear that many died from infection, not just from the bullet wounds. And so it is this whole thing about infections and bacteria, that this was also true in the Dark Ages, where if an infection occurred, we humans had no way to get around it. And yet, similar to the Buddha's awakening, humans have this ability of trying to see how to resolve the situation. And so we hear Van Leeuwenhoek was the person who invented a microscope. And with that, they discovered bacteria, little organisms that cause this problem. And then later on in this century or last century, we had Fleming, who discovered penicillin, something that acted against bacteria. And of course, now we have humans who have really studied and understood viruses and antiviruses and vaccine. So like the Buddha, we humans have discovered a problem, really looked and investigated ways of combating that and come up with solutions. Now, even with that knowledge, we have the solution to combat bacteria and viruses. And yet, as Shinran tells us, we still have ignorance. What do I mean? There are people who say, we don't need masks, we don't need vaccines. And so even with these solutions, ignorance pervades our human existence when our fellow humans kind of ignore these truths. And so it's similar to the Buddha. What he gave us was not just stories and things that we think deal with the afterlife. What he talked about was how the entire world and the entire universe works. And so what we're looking at is that we can resolve any problems by simply seeing all these things of impermanence and interdependence, and then our own limitations of how we try to think of ways of changing the outside world. And he's telling us that it is just our shifting of our inner thoughts that can help us through this. And so this disease of greed, hatred, ignorance stays with us. And we see it, as our own community, which is, we, of course, are an Asian community. And we've experienced this hate and greed in the sense of the anti-Asian sentiment. And, as recent as last year when there was this Black Lives Movement, some of us may have thought, oh, well, that's, unfortunate for African Americans, but, we're Asians. And yet now we realize that Black Lives Matter also means Asian lives matter. And also that it affects all colors, the police, blue lives matter. In fact, all colors matter. The rainbow lives matter. And what I'm saying here is that it's not that all lives matter detracts from any single one. It's that all of us. And it's not until the least supported, the most denigrated group, until that group is supported, all lives really do matter. And so we look at this to realize the sense of interdependence, that when anyone is denigrated, all of us are involved. And so we're at a critical time now, whether we still blame each other and are thinking of division or thinking of democracy, of this interdependence, that we all matter, and that what we do as individuals and as groups really determines what is true for all of us. And so I'd like to kind of end this with kind of an imaginary trip and look at our lives and think of our lives being somewhat like the salmon. And we're aware that salmon are are born upstream in little creeks and so forth. And then they swim down the creeks, and then their streams and rivers end up in the ocean. And they spend several years in the ocean. And then at some time they decide to go back. And so they fight upstream. And it's significant the way they climb through the rough tides and then the rapids, jumping over waterfalls, just struggling to get up, just fighting continually until they finally reach their place of birth and again start a new generation. Well, let's think of ourselves in a similar way, except let's think of ourselves going from the opposite way. Let's imagine we're born in the ocean, and we think that, oh, if we can go upriver, upstream, we can find this lake way on top where we can just bask and be at peace. We can think of that perhaps as nirvana. And then we realize that we have a little boat, and so we get in this boat and we start to row, and it's a struggle because in the ocean there are great waves where we have to get into the mouth of the river. And as we go upstream, we struggle. There are a lot of rapids, and all we can do is struggle with life, and we complain, and we think, boy, if I had a motorboat, or we have this desire. And then there are places where we can relax, and it's very comfortable. And so we enjoy that, and we say, oh, this is fine. But then we have to continue upward. And as we go up, there may be places that are unpassable. We have to get out of our boat and carry it around waterfalls. But we continue to struggle, and we complain about life until we finally reach the top where we have this peaceful lake. And so we can sit in our boat and relax and just enjoy it. But then let's say we hear the words of the Buddha and the three treasures. Hard is it to be born into human life. Now we are living it. Wondrous, rare, and difficult is it to hear the words of the Buddha. Now we hear it. If we do not resolve our present life now, when will we do it? And as we hear these words, we realize that the words of impermanence and interdependence. Impermanence, we notice that the water is going down, and that although we're in this pleasant place, we seem to be drifting back toward the ocean, back toward the sea. And so we're worried. And yet the words of the Buddha tells us that the struggle we had coming up, we missed the whole trip. That our life is not about just the struggle up like an animal existence just to get to another place. We are humans. And that seventh step means that we might enjoy this journey, that all these barriers are part of human life. And it is our attitude, the way we see life, that is important. And so as we travel downstream, we look at the sides. We enjoy the struggles through the rapids. We enjoy the quiet places where we might relax. And we realize that life is really just this balance of keeping this boat centered to enjoy this trip of life because it is rare and unusual and wondrous. And so this is an example of how we might look at life, that it is just not a struggle to be alive and to eat or be eaten like the lower realms of human existence, but it is that all of this is part of our human life. Now, as a Shin perspective on this, let's imagine that in this boat in the ocean as we start has a sail, and that sail we might call the Nembutsu, Namo Amida Butsu. And we realize that this sail really helps us, and what the sail represents is the efforts of others, the wind. And if we use the Nembutsu, the efforts of others, the realizations that our travel can be helped by angling the sail to benefit us with the wind, that our life can be more pleasant. And that is what we might think of as we travel upstream and actually come downstream. That we always have the sail of the Nembutsu, the efforts of others that help us in this travel, this journey through life. And with that awakening, we always respond with the words of the Nembutsu. Namo Amida Butsu. So please, for this April, we realize that the Buddha offered us this truth that we can transcend all these lower realms of human existence, not only from the lowest hell, but to the upper heavens. But we as humans have this one ability to transcend all that simply by responding to the Nembutsu and realizing that we as humans have this wonderful gift. So please join me in expressing our deepest sense of appreciation. Gasho, Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu.